Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth discussion in our reading group for SF Masterworks. We are reading the books that Golangs published as SF Masterworks in the order that they were published as Masterworks, not in their original publication order. And we're typically reading about one book a month, except in the case of today's book, which is 600 pages long. So we divided it up over 2 months. We had the first discussion about Cities in Flight by James Blish last month. It's posted on both Jared and my channels. And today's discussion is for the second part of Cities in Flight, which covers Earthman Come Home and something with the word time in it.
Triumph of Time.
Yeah, the Triumph of Time. Yeah.
Triumph of Time. So yeah, we'll be discussing both of those. I have only read up to 3/4 of the way through Earthman Come Home. Chris and Jared have fortunately read the other book as well. And also, Chris, since you weren't here last time, I'd love to hear what you thought of the first two books. So, Jared, would you like to start us off with
Sure.
introductions?
I'm Jared. I run the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel, and Foster, if you would have seen my review, non-spoiler, on these two last books, you would have seen that I told you to skip book 3 and move on to book 4. Chris, on to you.
Yeah, so my name's Chris-mohan. I sometimes make YouTube channels, YouTube videos about books and movies, and this is my second time reading Cities of Flight. And I hadn't mentioned just before we started this book that I DNF'd book 3 the first time, and Cities in Flight is literally the only book in my entire life that I have ever DNF'd. Okay.
Wow.
And let me tell you, if I hadn't seen Jared's video, I would have DNF'd it for a second time. But thankfully, I took his advice, parked book 3 at the point that I did, and started book 4. And while book 4 still draws, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
As you quite rightly say, like I probably wouldn't have finished it if you hadn't said like the end of the book at least has some things to discuss and it has some things to talk about. And I think that's my main takeaway from the book is this is a crap load of good ideas that were sort of very poorly executed in my view, or certainly not what I wanted out of the ideas. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I wrote down as many nice things about the ideas, nothing about the characters or the story, as I did angry notes about how the characters were all dealing with each other.
Yeah, book 4 will infuriate you for that. Oh my
really?
God, yeah, it's the worst for the. I would say the inter-character relationships, but we'll get on to that, I think, in some ways.
Yeah.
So I thought Mayor Amalfi was insufferable, and that was like 90% of the reason why it took me a long. I don't DNF, like I was telling Chris and Jared earlier. I don't DNF, so I will finish this book. I just and I was good about it this time. I usually start my reading for these discussions like a couple of days before. This time I started 2 weeks ahead, and I still couldn't finish it because it just went too slow for me. But yeah, what was I saying? I didn't like Mayor Amalfi's character. I didn't like. I think it's a certain genre of fiction, perhaps, like, those James Bond style books where one person does everything without telling anyone, and they're keeping the audience in suspense, but also everybody else for some reason. Why? But I haven't read any of those books. I just sort of assumed that this might have been acceptable as a style of storytelling for that reason. But yeah, what did you all think?
That was a question of mine too. It's like, why is this guy who's in charge of a city that flies in doing everything? Like, there's no delegation except for a few cases with his right-hand man there. And it's just like, it's so, that in itself was unrealistic. And just it just chalked it up to, I think the author didn't seem to want to bother with other characters. He
Mm,
just wanted to put his thoughts and ideas on paper and just do it through the one character, and that's it.
mm,
And he did it, and I think Chris brought this, not Chris, somebody brought this up in the last discussion, that this book especially was serialized
mm,
originally in a magazine, and so the chapters in the third book are episodic, and they have like just like a little beginning and a little end, and it's so explanatory. Like your main guy, Amalfi there, he just sits there and explains a story for each story.
yeah.
And he does it through dialogue half the time, which is infuriating because it could have been an action thing that was
Yeah.
happening, but it
Yeah.
wasn't happening. It was him just explaining it.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. It was interesting because, especially when I got to the end of book 4, when I was really at the end of my tether, and I decided to go back and find some synopsis of the book, right? Just for what happened in book 4, because there's no propulsion through the writing. I think that's the bit. I think and that's where it comes from, the serialized nature, is the fact that you're not needing people to be on the next chapter, if you know what I mean.
Mm,
Probably because I was published all the time. So you got a chunk of story somewhere in the chapter, tiny bit, and
mm,
then you get a lot of technobabble for a lot of it, and very little of the language was consistent from chapter to chapter. They would introduce new terms all the time that was almost impossible to follow. But when you read the synopsis of book 4, it sounds like classic, exciting space opera because of the things that essentially they were doing. I mean, it's that kind of end of the world kind of story that the
Yeah.
last book, and what are they going to do to stop the end of the world? They kind of explain it in sense. That could have been a really exciting, riveting novel, but actually, what I was reading does not match the synopsis, if you know what I mean. There's a kind of like stakes and all this kind
Yeah.
of stuff that's happening, and,
Yep.
and like on a high level, kind of questions about relationships and relationships and about how age and how icky that, all that kind of stuff. But actually, what I was reading,
mm.
like,
Yeah.
I got none of that at the time, and it was like, why? That doesn't make sense.
I
Yeah.
know time was ending, and they basically just had a boardroom meeting about it. That's what it was. It's like, okay.
So, so I mentioned that I got spoiled ish for the fourth book because I read the introduction, right? What I read there, and you guys tell me if this is what happens, is that Amalfi sees himself as the beginning of the next universe. And after reading the third book, I'm like, I don't want that universe to exist. Why? I'd rather everything just
Well,
ended.
it wasn't just him though. There was
Okay.
there were other people, and I think it, in Blish's prose is wandering,
Mm,
so it's not always hard to nail down exactly what he was plot wise coming out with. But I think each person involved at the end was going to have their own universe as well.
oh,
I think,
interesting.
and so it wasn't just like I said in the fourth book. He actually did introduce a few more characters that made it a little more interesting, so you didn't have
Mm.
to always go through Amalfi's head. Um,
Mm.
but which you're right, he was quite unbearable
Oh
at
yeah.
times, and so, but and there's a lot more I had to say about that last chapter
Yeah.
once we get there. But as far as book 3 goes, um, yeah, in my review I said it was skippable because you can just read book 4 and get what he
Yeah.
was getting at without
Mm.
knowing all the stuff in between, because it was, like I said, it was serialized previously and it was meant to stand alone. And I know
Mm.
for the collection, Blish supposedly went back and rewrote some stuff in order to like try to blend it, but I don't think it worked. And
No.
so book 4 stands on its own as its own thing. And at least in book 4, you get a few more characters, especially towards the end, where you have different characters sitting around a board table, having a meeting about the end of time, and trying to think about what to do about it. And it was funny that ultimately they really couldn't do anything about it, other than have a situation set where they may have some little influence on the next universe. So not much action.
I do think it's interesting when you think about the order that these books were written and published, though, because 3 was the first.
Yeah.
3 was number first, and I think if I had read 3 first, I might have been a bit more forgiving of it, if you know what I mean, because in its own right, I don't know about how the world's been set up and all of that kind of stuff that we knew about from reading books 1 and 2 and the stories, the prequels that kind of went into it, that kind of made book 3 feel redundant, a bit like you're saying, in a lot of ways, and especially when you put book 4 in the end, like the outcome of it. Like, it is very much what I read of it, of Amalfi showing that he's smarter than everybody else, or that's the kind, and you're not rooting for him at the start, so he's just smug and a bit self-important, and he's all the worst characteristics of humanity in a lot of ways, especially male characters. Like, my God, he's insufferable to read about. Whereas at least some of the other stories, you kind of got a few more interesting characters, people that you could root for, people that you kind of were in peril, or that kind of stuff, rather than this kind of thing of humanity's in peril. And I think even at the stage, I never actually really cared whether the universe ended or not. It kind of didn't matter, and I think they'd given up as well.
Couldn't wait.
So how did they take living through that long, assuming it happens in the distant future? How did they? Because one of my gripes with Earthman Come Home is we didn't address the fact that this guy's been living for a millennium. Like, there was one brief sentence about, do you know what it's like to make daily decisions as a mayor of the city? Quickly followed up with, I'm also in love with D and what. Okay, we'll talk about that. But they didn't address this, and I think a lot of it is because we got the entire story through Amalfi's eyes. None of, like, what is the rest of the city doing? How are they living through this? And as far as I can tell, they have immortality, but basically what they're doing with the immortality is the daily drudgery that people want to escape and do other things with their life with. So why would this entire city of people want to live like that for a millennium? And, like, those are interesting questions that I think could have been explored but weren't. I think maybe it's just meant to be a bunch of, like, action sequences with, like, big maneuvers, like moving planets and things like that. Maybe it's not meant to be thought-provoking story, but yeah. What was my point? Yeah, they didn't address the aging thing at all. So I was curious, because I haven't read the 4th book, if that comes up at all and how it's handled.
Yeah, he keeps saying that it comes up a couple times where they had to, in book 3, where they had to try and get resources for that plant where they could manufacture the drug that made them not age. But it is a consistent throwaway line, like, yep, we don't age now, and they just keep going, and yeah, you're right, it doesn't get addressed that well as far as that goes, but other than the fact that they were able to survive until the end of time. And so in the 4th book, it does get brought up that maybe Amalfi's too old to be doing this anymore, and he gives up his mayorship. Sorry to spoil it for you, Vasha.
No.
I know you're on the edge of your seat. But he does give up his mayorship at one point to try to move on to something else. So it does at least get brought up in that manner. It's not there's nothing in depth about it. It
Mm,
he doesn't delve into any of that stuff
got it.
in a philosophical manner, other than just mentioning it.
Hmm.
I think this is going to be fascinating because obviously we've had two books, Forever War and Am Legend, and I think both really investigate the kind of nuts and bolts of what the book's about. You know what the impetus was to make it about. The Forever War is this kind of idea. If you were fighting a war over a long time and you were away from home a long time, what would that feel like when you come back?
Hmm.
All of those kind of things.
Yeah.
They really go into right
Yep.
here. I'm going to propose some end game scenarios for you here of actually what would happen, so that it's philosophically interesting. Am Legend does the same kind of in isolation and does all that stuff. And here, in the first couple of chapters of each book, he lays the groundwork for what could be really fascinating kind of exploration into this. Even in book 4, when he kind of throws this whole situation with Dee back in the thing of, right, if you live for a millennia,
Hmm.
does the concept of a relationship completely and utterly just rip apart and throw on its head? Because most of us live for a certain period of time, get married 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever, and kind of have a lifespan that we will, in theory, have one life partner for. And at the end of it, you'll have a quality number of years together, but ultimately you'll grow into old age together. But if you don't age,
Hmm.
surely the whole concept of relationship totally breaks down. And I couldn't tell you how frustrated I was that it came down to this essentially about power imbalance between him and Dee. You know, Dee was in a sort of loveless relationship that had been going on for hundreds of years. Like, at what point do you go?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it wasn't. And you're right. It wasn't explored. It
Wasn't explored at all.
It was just like, yeah, we love each other, and I love her, and for a while, I think Dee went with him for a little while, and then that was it. It
But then
was
she
just
stays with her husband. Like, the whole thing
Yeah,
is
and at the
just
end, she stays with her original. What was the guy's name? I can't remember now.
Hazelton?
Mark
Yeah.
Hazelton.
Hey,
Yeah,
Yeah.
Hazelton. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
and and she stays with him at the end of the universe, and hopefully she got her own universe afterwards. But
But
Did she? What was her character like in book 4? Because in this one, she was the
yeah,
dumb
yeah.
person that got everything explained to,
Ah,
and
that was painful.
and then the scene with the king where he's like, yeah, he's going to take D, and like neither, like she doesn't get a say in that, and Mark is not upset by it, other than the fact that, yeah, what's up with using women as bait in this book? Like he did that even on the planet of he or her or however that's pronounced. And, uh,
He, oh, heh.
yeah,
Yeah,
but the
it's
free, yeah,
I mean that is a sign of the times that this was written, and I guess this is your classic example right
mm,
here of a what do you want to say it, limited worldview when it came to male female relations,
mm,
um, and yeah, it killed me, especially when he what was a line he said, I wish you knew your history.
yeah.
And then he goes on to explain the history for another 2 paragraphs, and then her husband Hazelton's like, "Yep, you're right." you know,
Yeah.
and I'm just like, "Oh, this is
you know,
horrible." The
it,
dialogue was
it,
so bad.
oh yeah. In
That's
theory,
horrible.
this is the worst of masculinity because it is mansplaining for
Yeah,
600 pages. Like,
absolutely.
that is
Yep.
completely what the book is something to do. But that's like, I've got to be fair about it. None of the characters are well written. Like,
Yeah.
this is not a character-based story at all.
No, you're right.
There's
No.
nothing about it. As you say, the dialogue. I mean, I just kept on coming away with it. You set up this kind of like interesting enough construct of ideas and science, and then you have a soap opera plays out. You know, in terms of like each chapter, like the dialogue
Yeah,
is that level of interaction. There's
yeah,
only like pithy bits that actually happen, and then we move on to the next chapter, and in a
Yeah.
slightly different scenario, slightly different place, and things will move forward, maybe 30 years, and here's
Mm,
where we are, and you're getting another bit. It feels serialized in that way, and I think that
yeah.
that ultimately, while we're going to continue to bash on this in a lot of different ways. I think it is a product of how it was published in a lot of
Mm.
ways, and I'm sure it worked at the time in that form when you were kind of give me another bit of that world or what
Mm.
happened in that world or the sense of that world, because that's what people would have been into. But as a cohesive novel, it's not good.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I did find, like, even I tried to read it like that, like, so I tried not to have issue with the fact that, like, overall, the story wasn't that interesting, that there was no overarching sequence that we could, I guess, follow. But there's I had issues within each story. For instance, with the planet of her, like, just taking it out of access. It did that pretty in a pretty cavalier fashion, right? Like, taking these decisions that affect an entire planet. And sure, let's say that's a certain genre or style of storytelling in which, like, there's a dude who comes and saves everyone. Okay, cool. But then what about the consistency? They had a broken spin dizzy, and as far as I can tell, you need a spin dizzy running to have the field going, right? So once they separated from the planet, Amalfi claims that the spin dizzy screen of the planet will make it so the atmosphere doesn't escape and they'll still have heat. Cool, I'll buy that. But where the hell did they get that spin dizzy from? And if they were able to manufacture a new one, why didn't they repair their own? So, like, it just had a lot of, like, it felt
Yeah.
like there were a lot of inconsistencies within the story, each story as well, that, yeah, I found difficult to read. But yeah, did you guys notice that?
Yeah. Well, I
Or
think in some cases he mentions there's more than one spin dizzy working at a time to
Mhm,
fly the city. So I'm not sure. Because you're right, he didn't explain it very well, and
mhm.
I'm not sure if it was just one of the machines that wasn't working at a time, and eventually that would break down other machines. Because I guess you might need
Yeah.
you might need all of them to to consistently do take on the load or whatever. Um, but I'm just conjecturing on that because it was confusing sometimes, and it
Mm,
wasn't well put together.
yeah.
Yeah, the sense felt a lot the one way through, and this goes back to straight to book one, that I'm trying to introduce a concept. I'll give you a scientific reason for it, but the last bit I'm going to fudge because I can't actually explain why this would happen. But once I've established that means it's in the world now, a bit like the anti-aging drugs. I mean, the only time they even talk about it is again is in book four when they reached civilization, which couldn't generate the plant themselves, so they did it synthetically themselves. And
Mm,
again, they just kind of go, "Oh, you did it yourselves. You're brilliant at chemistry." That was kind of that
Oh,
was kind of what they did. You should teach us something about that. That's really really good. Like that you did that. That well done, everybody. And that's how you were able to have long lives,
yeah.
but not as long as me. It's like this for a book that revels in the amount of science that it throws in page after page, paragraph after paragraph. It doesn't feel like good science, if you know what I mean. Even though there's equations in there, you can do all that kind of stuff. It doesn't feel. It feels more ideas based than actual science based, which, given the amount of science that he puts in, feels like waste space. It feels like
Yeah.
this could have been a 200-page book instead of a 600-page book.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, like you said, though, it was a product of his times as far
Yeah.
as it was trying to get it was serialized. So
Mhm.
when you're serializing something like that, you're trying to just put you're filling a quota and you're
Yeah.
Mm,
getting the stories out there. Um, but like you said, he did have some interesting ideas
Oh, for sure.
yeah.
in the
Yeah.
book, and the one that really stood out to me in the Earthman Come Home, the third book, was he has this line here. He says, "Before death had been indefinitely postponed," which that brings up your that's one of those throwaway lines about, yeah, we're immortal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he says it had been thought that memory would turn longevity into a Greek gift because not even the human brain could remember a practical infinity of accumulated facts. Nowadays, however, nobody bothered to remember many facts. That was what the city fathers and like machines were for. They stored data. Living men memorized nothing but processes, throwing out obsolete ones for new ones as invention made it necessary. When they needed facts, they asked the machines. And I was just like, wow, he just wrote about the internet in the
Yeah.
1950s, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I thought that was pretty brilliant paragraph, And I
Yeah.
was like, oh wow, that's really cool. And it was because I think that's so relevant today,
Yep. Yep.
because I've had this discussion with my kids saying, because they just like, oh, I'll just look it up.
Mm.
That's all they ever do is just look it up. And I'm like, well, how are you gonna know how to fix something in your house or whatever, or in your car or what have you? Oh, I'll just look it up. Well,
Mm.
what if you can't?
Yeah.
And then you get the blank stare.
Yeah.
But so I was kind of interested that he was thinking about that way back then. This
Yep.
is like,
Yep.
over 75 years ago. And that was fascinating, I thought.
Yep.
I think there's moments like that throughout the book, like right throughout the book, like in nearly every chapter or something. And like in some ways, like one of the reasons I've really enjoyed doing this series so far, I know we're only 3 books in, is that you get into the habit of let's write that bit down, because I think that that's really like a tasty kind of philosophical or technological, advancement or idea to
Mhm.
have back then. But I get sick of doing it in this book because he never really did anything with it beyond the point that he
Mm.
introduces it. And
Yeah.
and you kind of go, right, I stopped writing them down at that stage and I was like, this is frustrating for me, maybe.
Mm.
And I can say in that case, I'm the problem there, because what I wanted out of this book was not what the book wanted to do.
Yeah.
That's not the story that he wanted to tell. So then it's my problem. It's not necessarily the author's problem,
Sure.
but it meant a lot of those like great ideas, even though the big one is actually the reason that I don't think the
Mm.
book works
Yeah.
insofar as
Yeah.
the idea
Yeah.
of the spin dizzy.
Yeah. But Chris, what you said there though is why the book didn't age well. Because you say
Mm.
it's your problem, but it's not just your problem. It's a lot
Yeah.
of people's problem today that's going to read this book today.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that many people will have the same exact problem. You know what I mean? And so,
Yeah.
is it just your problem? Because it's my problem too.
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
I guarantee it's Vasha's problem.
Yes.
And um, so you're right. He had these great ideas and never followed through with them.
Yeah.
Never delved into them as a story, rather
Mm.
than what we got.
It felt a lot like not. So I think the first two that we read, Chris, like you said,
Yeah.
we had an idea and we explored like the entire gambit of consequences from that. Here we have a few good ideas like anti-aging and spin dizzy, and then like many that are sort of seeded into the story. But we're not really exploring consequences of anything. We're just using them for some what I think the author thinks is an action-packed sequence, but it's really just dialogue that explains everything. Yeah, so I guess that's what was frustrating for me too, that we didn't explore consequences. But I did wonder, is it really a product of its time, or is it a style of storytelling where we just do a bunch of action? Like I've seen a lot of movies like this where no one explains anything. We just have some cool stuff to throw around, and then things happen, nobody cares, we all go home. So like is it just like popcorn fiction? Is there nothing like this today where we don't go into the depths of all the concepts and we just throw a bunch of stuff around to tell a fun story, although this wasn't necessarily fun for me, but like what could be a fun story to watch or read?
That's a good point.
Yeah. I mean, you said it before we started recording, Varsha. This story, and you had the same thought as I did. Insofar as I was reading this, going, this is exactly what people say they don't like about classic sci-fi. Insofar that this book and what it tries to do, but I wonder if it's just space opera fiction, and because I don't have a great deal of experience with space opera, where they eschew the philosophical discussions for the action, just to pretty much what you're saying, and maybe all space opera, even modern, like Alistair Reynolds, Peter Hamilton, whoever you're going to talk about, maybe they all do this insofar as the ideas aren't what they're trying to convey here. Scale, size, scope, the
Mm,
bigness of the world is what they're doing. And I think that the book does that. It definitely gives the idea that we're only like a dot at the
Mhm.
mm,
moment compared
Yeah.
to
yeah,
what we could be. It definitely
Yeah.
gives off that size of scale. And maybe that's like you say, that's the genre book rather
mm,
than the classic sci-fi that I've enjoyed reading, which has been the philosophical stuff where they
yeah,
explore themes and ideas and
yeah,
technological advances or whatever else it is. And like I say, this book wasn't interested in that other than kind of saying, here's what's happening in the world, this is what we're building this on. It was smart enough to go like having spin dizzy is one thing, but it doesn't make any sense unless we solve the aging problem. So you've got
mm,
to have
yeah,
anti-aging drugs as well, and putting the two things together. And okay, there's your premise for going off and doing whatever you want
yeah,
with
yeah.
that stage. So I think it is an interesting discussion, especially as we move through these books to kind of see, is this a style of fiction rather than just kind of a badly executed version of it?
Mm, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
I think the order in which we are reading the books in this collection also sets us up for that sort of expectation. Because,
Mhm.
like you said, Chris, if we had started with the third book, then we'd know what kind of story it is, right? It's just people wandering like from city to city. We're not exploring any specific technological advances or any specific big ideas. We're just doing the big idea and
Yeah,
moving
yeah,
on. uh in the first book, it felt like because the first book was the creation of the spin disease and the anti-aging drug that we read, it felt like the rest of them would be an exploration of the consequences, which it wasn't. It
Hmm.
Okay, in the second book was sort of an exploration in that, oh, cities were able to fly off of Earth, cool. But then everything that happened from there on felt silly, and like, yeah, I didn't like the second book very much either. But the third book, then reading the third book, but at least the second book was still something in that ballpark of exploring consequences a little bit. But the third book is just like episodic and not at all in line with potentially set expectations that we're still going to see what else can happen as a result of this.
But
Um,
in the second book, though, at least had a character you could relate to
yeah, yeah,
yes,
because it brought a character on that knew nothing,
yes,
and so as the reader, you knew nothing, and you were learning with him, and so
mm,
that was at least you were immersed in that way, at least in
yeah,
that
yeah.
regard. With Amalfi, you are not
No,
immersed at
no,
all.
not
You
at all.
you
Yeah,
cannot relate to him,
yeah,
and so and like I said, it's episodic, but
yeah.
yeah.
So,
Chris is like a scared young boy, you know. He and you get the sense of wonder of the world through him as he's kind of going, "Oh
mm,
God, I'm going down here. I don't know what I'm going to run into or otherwise." And like that carries the second book. It carries you through the second book, as you say. Like it's okay, and he's a character that is readable, you know, as
mm,
opposed to some of the other ones.
yeah.
yeah, yeah. And the ending of the second book, which I hadn't finished for the last discussion, it just ended with him being given the title of city manager. Like, that's it. That, like, you you just ended there. Like, that's supposed to mean something to me. And then it made more sense when we started
Yeah.
the third book. So
Yeah,
I guess they just aren't meant to be read in that order. So yeah,
It makes you wonder why they package it like this
yeah,
because
yeah.
they, it's like he definitely wrote the first two books in order to make sense of
Mm,
what he wrote before,
yeah.
somewhat,
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because he explained the whole. In the first book, he explains the origin of how all this came
Yeah.
about. In the second book, we get a character view, and um, the cities take off, and so I wonder why they collected it like this
yeah.
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
chronological order rather than in a
Publication.
Publication order. Yeah.
publication order. Yeah.
Yeah. It, and I think both the beginning, forward and afterward, tell you not to read them in this order. I should have
Yeah,
listened.
Oh, do they?
yeah. The afterward basically says start with book two. I think is where
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
suggest they say start with book two.
Mm,
Oh,
Uh,
really? Interesting.
to be weird. Like I could imagine having read book three, and if you like book three and read book one, you would have thought book one was absolutely brilliant. because if you like that world and like the kind of effect that it had set up, book 1 is clever enough that, and it has enough like interrelationship stuff with Wagner and the characters that are there to kind of go, okay, this is interesting. This is the world that's been set up. I mean, they don't do anything even quite like that again in any way. They don't set up even male female dynamics that way or anything like that. It's just kind of again just thrown to the side and said, right, I've explored that bit. We're moving on. But I think reading this is 1, 2, 3, 4. You can't help but feel like it peters out, or that it kind of doesn't have any kind of impetus kind of towards the end of the book, because it wasn't even the way that it was written. It was just it was done the other way around.
And the author does know how to do exploration of consequences, or just playing out something end to end. Like, because in the first book, for instance, we saw there were two things that I thought were done really well. One was the whole conversation around faith and belief, which I think I forget the name of the main character, but that they explored in some depth. I thought that was done really well. And then the slow descent into madness of the person who's manning the Jupiter bridge every day. I thought that was done really well, like, because you've taken an idea and then you're figuring out what else could happen because of it. So yeah, you're right. Going to the third book from there feels like whoa, sorry, I nearly spilled my coffee. Going to the third book from there feels like a downgrade for sure.
Yeah. That was interesting, because he did explore religion a little bit more in book 4. And the word he used, there was a religious order called stochasticism
that he invented.
I'm wondering what you think that stood in for, Chris, because you read it. I don't think Vasha got to it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was that kind of I kind of linked that to, it's the start of the third book that he kind of talks about the fact that religion is ended as a concept, but that often civilized religions have it, and that actually, even though religion was dead as a concept, 10% of them were really staunch, fervent believers. So there's a fanaticism that carried on through life, whereas 90% were indifferent. So I think he's using that stoicism, whatever it is, to kind of say, like, this is still a civilized society here, or this is still a very what's the word I'm looking for? This is still a very cohesive society that is well ordered and has ideas and philosophical ideas, rather than kind of just people scattered to the four winds. Or as what was actually happening is that Earth sort of died out, in some way, because everybody was living for so long. There was no ideas, there was no energy, there was nothing here. But that stock, whatever you call it, was
it died out.
Vibrant society.
Yeah, and then it was taken over by that disjoined guy who's like head of the Warriors of God, and so he so then now it's like almost like a crusading type of Christianity almost. And then you had and he was explaining the scholastics to, he was mansplaining the scholastics to everybody else. And he says I suspect in actuality that, like intellectuals in all times and places, they are largely out of touch with the general assumptions of the culture in which they're operating. And I was like, is he comparing stochastics, I think it's stochastics, to just stoicism or agnosticism or atheism? And I
had actually sort of equated it to Russia, actually, to the kind of, because stoicism is like perestroika, kind of communism, all of that kind of stuff. That's kind of where I went with that.
That could be it too, yeah. And then eventually this John, apostle of God, he just leaves them a letter and leaves off and says, well, looks like the time's coming to an end, so hopefully you'll be alone in your doubt. and he's done. and I wrote a big huh? At the end of that chapter, I'm like, that's it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
I kind of went with Jorn, don't call me John. Every
Right.
time I read it, I was like, don't you dare call me
John,
John.
don't
I'd
call
be
me
really
John. Yeah.
angry. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, again, another really good example. Like you create a foil for Amalfi, and he's
A
around there
good,
for a while. A
yeah.
good foil, or somebody that's not prepared to buy into his bullshit all the time. And the result, I'll just throw him away, or it'll just kind of do nothing with it, you know.
Yeah.
And the
It
world's
was
coming here; it's not as important.
it was just like,
mm,
oh, okay. Well, we really can't do anything about you guys. So, good luck with your doubt, and see you in the next universe.
Yeah,
I was like, oh, okay,
yeah.
because he really built up this guy to be, the a great antagonist.
yeah.
He built them up, and then all of a sudden it was just kind of fizzled out.
Yeah.
And it's all about the next civilization after that. Maybe it was a case of his editor said to him, well, we're going to give you another 4 issues to talk about this, but we're only going to give you one more.
Mm,
And he kind of went, right, well, I'll need to wrap this up in some way, or something like that. You never know what way the publishing of that really played into the storytelling
Yeah,
aspect.
was the Triumph of Time also serialized? I thought just Earthman Come Home was, or was.
yeah. I don't know. It was because it was longer,
Mm,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it is a single story this time instead of being
that's
a
right. That's right.
bunch of episodic ones. So not sure how it was originally published.
Mm,
Yeah, because it was a 12-year period, wasn't the whole thing done in?
oh, okay.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah,
And
Oh.
then I guess he wrote the first 2 novels as an explanation
that's
because
been explanation.
because the 4th novel ends everything, ends the universe. So, he could only go backwards.
Although it ends the narration, but the last line of the book is, and then creation begun, or something like that. Creation begins, something like that.
Mm,
Yeah.
Well,
So
yeah.
yeah, there's that kind of cyclical nature of the world, isn't it?
mm.
Yeah, I don't know. That ties
Creation
into
begins.
the theory that the universe expands and then it contracts.
Yeah, contracts. Yeah, yeah.
So he had a little bit of that in there.
Yeah. So one more question I had for you guys. Well, I have a few more, but this next question is the first 2 books felt like they were about something, right? Like the Forever War was really about the Vietnam War. I Am Legend, I don't know specifically what it was, but there was something being explored there, right? Like the loneliness and isolation of this person. So it's too much to ask of the book as a whole, but were there any specific sections or chapters that felt like this is about something else? Like there's commentary being made here about something more important or bigger than what's on the page.
Well, the 4th book, I think he's definitely exploring the, what if the universe were to end? Like he's
Mm,
going in that direction, and what would the end of time look like?
mm,
And how that would come about, because I think that was a during the 50s they were still exploring Einstein's theories, and
mm,
they were still, and of course the atomic bomb and all that stuff. They were
Mhm.
still reeling from the fallout of that and what happened, and so there was a lot of big ideas coming out that had this kind of end of time, end of the world, what have you, end of the universe, and the theory of relativity and all that stuff, and how expansive can that be, and how
mm,
far can that take us, and how far can it go. And so I think he had that kind of big science question in mind when he wrote,
mm,
especially The Triumph of Time. I think for the 3rd book, I think he was just writing stuff to throw in a magazine to get,
mm,
to serialize. And maybe the 3rd book is about like how would humanity go on from Earth into the stars. Um, so that you could look at it that way, as
Mm.
far as the third book goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the book is about, or the genesis of the book is about the fact that the Cold War was going on, and the fact
Mm.
that you know,
Yeah.
I don't think he's seen an end of the Cold War because the two superpowers that would eventually kind of bludgeon each other to death, and the
Mm.
point that in that event, the only way humanity can grow is off the planet at that
Mhm.
stage. And I think if it's about anything, it's about that. But as we've said like a lot of times, it doesn't really do anything with that other
Yeah.
than like there's a throwaway line about when New York leaves. As like this, I've made this kind of pithy point about this is the center of the universe being New York. When it leaves, then humanity leaves, and the
Mm.
Russians take over the world. Then there's like a
Yeah.
throwaway line about that, and he kind of says, "Right, that's okay. Let's move on." The Americans have advanced, and they're still stuck on Earth, kind of thing. But
Yeah.
but other than that, I think then it just becomes like a space opera-ish kind of thing that obviously did well enough for him that people asked him to fill in a backstory and do whatever. It
Mm.
became probably a signature, his way to make a living. I would say in a
Yeah.
lot of ways.
Yeah, that makes sense. It does feel like, to what you said, Chris, about the only way for humanity is to go off the planet. In a lot of cases, it felt like it was the worst of humanity. Like we didn't try to improve or change anything that was bad. Like coming off of series I loved, like Becky Chambers, I forget what it's called, but the first book is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. I loved those books. They explored, you know, what it's like to be kind, what alternative societies where people don't have to be horrible to each other and there's not a resource crunch all the time. They just do such a
Mm.
wonderful job that this feels like, obviously, yeah, this feels a bit flat to read in that regard. But yeah, like I think the right way to read this to get any enjoyment from it at all is to just look at the big ideas and go, wow, oh, you're moving a planet, cool, without thinking about, okay, what is that going to do to the people on the planet. And yeah, so that, I guess, yeah, it is unsatisfying if you want something out of it other than what it does, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah. Yeah.
You could look at it as a cautionary tale too. It's like let's fix the planet we're on rather than
Mm, yeah.
because the same kind of crap is going to happen out there too.
Mm, yeah.
Uh, so you
Yeah.
could kind of look at it that way.
Well, they sort of make that point, don't they? I mean, they've got these flying cities, and at a certain point, they land somewhere and they stay there.
Mm,
Yeah, right.
They aren't going to move.
Yeah,
They're just going to be resident in a new place, and
he called it the
especially
jungle, I think,
the
right?
jungle. That's
Yeah,
exactly right.
yeah.
So, and the idea that if there's no change in administration, because Amalfi is in charge of everything for a long time, there's no impetus to go do anything. And even when Amalfi wants to do something else at a certain stage, everybody's like, "Oh, we'll come with the humanity's stuck."
Yeah.
Democracy, for all of its faults, creates this idea that things will always change. It's at
mm,
some stage there's always opportunity for change.
Yeah, I
yeah.
think that's a good. I think that ties into what you were saying about the Soviets and the Cold War,
Yeah.
and how it seemed like Blish thought that was going to go on forever, um, and that kind of reflects how, yeah, all these cities are in the jungle. They're doing the same thing that they were previously. Like nothing's going to change, even though we have the whole universe to
Universe.
explore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, because it was always about it at the start of the book. They moved for trade reasons, for resource reasons. It was always
Yep.
about that. And at a certain point, and I think that's the point of the civilization that has done the anti-aging drugs synthetically, is like, okay, we don't need resources. We don't, like, that's not a problem anymore. We can just sort of do this ourselves and kind
mm,
of exist just to live forever and do nothing with it. And
Mhm.
and,
Yeah.
and I think I found that bit frustrating as well. Is that okay? Say I did live for 1,000 years. And they make the point that Amalfi doesn't know an awful lot about anything, in a lot of ways. If you lived for 1,000 years, I think you would.
mm, yeah.
Well, he doesn't know enough about everything,
Yeah.
but he also does everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is everybody else doing?
Good. Yeah.
Why does the
We're-
city manager need to know how to pilot the city? Why?
Yeah.
Like they
Yeah.
have that
Yeah.
realization 3/4 of the way into like,
Yeah.
and 3/4 of the way into the book, but a millennium after they've been flying, that the city manager doesn't need to do the flying. You can have a pilot for that. Like, oh, hello.
Yeah.
um, so
Yeah.
um, Ed, I want to ask a new question. Is that
Okay.
okay?
Cool.
Okay.
Please.
So, so I was reading a short story. I think it was William 10. It was told from the point of view of this businessman. And the way it plays out is there's a big crisis, and then the businessman solves it. And there's something about the way he thinks by virtue of being a businessman and therefore only caring about profit, that he's able to solve it. When I read that story, I thought it's a commentary on how, like the businessman is the most important kind of person in our society. And that's the comment that William Ten was making. But then I read the author's note afterwards, in which he says he hated writing that point of view character, but he wanted to tell the story. He tried it from many different characters' points of view, but finally the one that stuck was this character whom he hated with all of his being and everything he stood for. And so like he felt a bit disappointed and slightly depressed that he had so much in common with someone he hated so much and whose ideologies he hated so much. So that was a bit eye-opening for me, in that like the main character is often not who the author himself is rooting for. So I was wondering about Amalfi, given how insufferable he is. Do you think, the author likes this person and or it felt like he does, but is there room to think otherwise?
Yeah, I think that I think he just used him as a
Mm.
explanatory piece.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the character of Amalfi is really that much of a character as
Mm.
he is more of just a way to spout out all the ideas he had.
Mm.
Uh, and so, did the author like Amalfi?
Mm.
I think it
And
was irrelevant, really.
yeah, what I mean by that is, yeah, I don't mean just like actual like, just like I should be more clear. I mean, like, do you actually think that this kind of person is who must rule the world? Like, because Amalfi does in a certain
Mm.
sense. Like, is this the kind of person you think will do a good job of leading the world or the planet or the universe into a good place? Which, based on the ending, it seems like he does think so.
Um,
Which, yeah.
well, that question is actually brought up in the
Okay.
final chapter.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, because they do have arguments with each other
Mm-hmm.
back and forth, like about because somehow they knew that they were going to be creating their own universes at the end,
Mm.
and they had this kind of discussion about, well, I think one guy was like, I wouldn't want to live in your universe,
Mm.
and so they
Okay.
there was a little bit, like I said, there was a little bit more characterization towards the end of the fourth book, where
Okay.
some of the characters actually started becoming characters rather than just caricatures, I guess.
Mm.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so that was brought up a little bit. Um, yeah, and I don't know how to explain it more than that, because it was it's almost too little, too late.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
But it was there, that final bit. Like I've it's the one bit I've tabbed of the entire bloody book, to be honest, because at least it provided some finality to it.
Mhm.
It's where Malfi says, Of what use was another universe of this kind he had just seen die?
Mm.
Nature provided to those and had doomed them at the same moment." And then he goes on to explain each of the rest of them. What would happen if instead he decided to do something different? And that's kind of where the resolution of the book comes from. He decides that anarchy is better than more of the same in
Mm.
some ways. And I mean, I don't think it's a side of Amalfi we've seen it. It wasn't brought forward at any stage. But I think as a construct and idea, it's an interesting one insofar as what is the point of just hitting the reset button to do exactly the same thing again?
Mm.
Is it not
Right.
more interesting to exist and create with a different stimulus? So rather than kind of as kind of the forward might have suggested it was about him and putting himself into the future, it was more about, well, what if I just do the thing that you're not supposed to do? Which at least does tie into the fact that he was bored and that everybody at the end of the time was very bored. There was no impetus in life. Everybody was just thought this existence sucks. Let's rip it up and do something again.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, because he brought up the question, what is it going to be like? And he said that's unknowable.
Yeah.
And the unknowable is what he wanted.
Once.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think is actually, you know, in some ways is interesting enough that it sort of made a lot of the rest of it. I think you said this pretty much in your review, Jared, insofar as like that idea is a blockbuster idea. You know, I think it's a big idea. It's something that it feels like it's been worth exploring. Whether this book did it or not, it kind of raises big questions, which is what classic sci-fi is supposed to do. And why this is probably in the Sci-Fi Masterworks series because of that ending. Those last 3 paragraphs.
Yeah, it's like the book was trying to redeem itself. And, give you a half decent page at the ending there to kind of wrap stuff up in a better way.
Yeah.
You're never finishing this book first. I'm just, I feel very confident in that.
Before the end of the year, challenge accepted. So the only kind of books that I really DNF are if I don't like where the author's coming from. Like if I fundamentally disagree with their ideas. Like I think Ayn Rand comes to mind. I DNF'd her book, and that's pretty much it. So I will finish this eventually. Jared, go ahead.
The question that came up among some of our page chewing peers is, why is this a masterwork?
Yes.
So why do you think it's a masterwork?
I think just the big ideas. Because I feel like the Forever War, it does explore some very scientific concepts in a very nice way, but and the second book wasn't that scientific. There was some like what's the word I'm looking for? Rigor in science written up, which I didn't buy, but it was there. Similarly, this one had that bit of like slightly rigorous science, but also a lot of big ideas. And I based on this book, I'm now coming to believe it's not the writing style or the immense character work or anything that would have a book put in the Masterworks. I thought the selection would be more well-rounded in that regard, like choosing a book for all of its merits, not just the big scientific ideas. But now I'm coming to think that this one's probably just there for the interesting science-ish ideas.
What do you think, Chris?
So I don't think when we started this journey, this 15-year friendship that we keep on joking about, I think we would all accept that we expected not all of these books to be loved and liked. I think that's part of the reason that this is an interesting journey insofar as explore what makes classic sci-fi and what do we not like about it. And I think for all 3 of us, maybe I'm being unkind, but I don't think any of the 3 of us would consider ourselves experts in the field, and that's what makes it interesting, if you know what I mean. That's what makes part of the journey forward. So, as you say, we've had 3 very different books so far. We basically had what I think is a classic sci-fi, a book that I loved at the start more than, say, certainly some others. The second one, you're right, is a dystopia book. Like, it's not so much a science fiction space book in any way, and this one is a big ideas space opera. That the other two were not. You know, that kind of idea of a overlong book about things, but with some ideas rather than about ideas. And the next book that you're going to come up against is another type of book altogether. It's very philosophical sci-fi, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's this spread of types of books that you get, and I think we are going to hit ones every so often that we might be able to smell what they're like, even from the title, from the author, from that kind of stuff from far
Mm,
Mm,
away, and kind of say this is going to be probably one of these types of books,
mm,
and we'd probably have to come to some sort of agreement to say, you know, it's okay to DNF some of these because I'd
yeah,
be surprised if we actually make it through
yeah.
all of them if we have a hard and fast rule about trying to get through. But I will say, Jared gets the absolute gold star for Reader of the Month this month for
oh,
finishing this book cover to cover because this was a challenging read
It
for
was.
me,
it
second time
was
over.
it was challenging. But but I'm not um I'm glad that I did read it
Yeah,
though. It's not you know because I liked I don't know I like to break stuff down and analyze it
yeah,
and look at it no matter whether the merits are
Mm,
something that I'm looking for or not. I mean, because
yeah,
and you have a discussion like this, and that's what makes it palatable because you want to find out what works and what doesn't, and for you and for for if anybody else wants to know, and so that's part of the pleasure of it. Um, and as far as this being a masterwork, um, it's not that it's not that Blish couldn't write.
yeah,
He can
sure,
write. There were actually a few times where some some descriptors were kind of poetic,
yeah,
and so he had talent. That's not debatable, I think, in his writing. It's just I just think it's just um, we're not used to this style, and um, and he was not trying to make good characters at all. He wasn't trying to do that, and so, but he could be poetic,
mhm,
especially when he describes that glass of wine or whatever it was in that last chapter. I thought that was a beautiful passage right
yeah.
there, and I liked how he described that. He even mentioned the meniscus of the wine in the glass, and
That's right.
I
That's
was
right.
like, oh, that's a scientific term put in a beautiful poetry, And um, so, and I think he probably had the respect of a lot of his peers at the time that these were published, and he probably had, and so I think some people have read this and taken some inspiration from it to create other stuff, and that's
Yeah,
why I think it's in the Masterworks
yeah.
collection.
mm,
Influential. Plus, you've also got to remember, he wasn't writing a book for the SF Masterworks collection. He was writing a book
yeah.
for his audience that was reading it at the time. You
Yeah,
know, and,
sure.
and obviously, it was doing a good enough job for even to be considered
Yeah,
for
maybe even
publication in
for
this in that way. Yeah,
yeah, maybe even for an extra paycheck.
yeah, indeed.
It's
Mm, yeah, yeah. That
So,
makes sense.
but like you, Jared, like I was really looking forward to the discussion, even though I really don't like the book very much at
Mm,
all. But I still think that's what makes it a really interesting discussion because exploring what doesn't work about why or what I wanted from the book and exploring my own feelings about that is where the whole process and the whole interest in this comes from.
yeah,
yeah. Yep. That I agree. I mean, I think one of the things that I've been trying to do recently is try to learn to write. And it's important to see things that I don't like and
Mm,
analyze why I don't like them. So I can take that learning. So I agree that it has merit just um, from that perspective. But also, like, it's not entirely bad. I did
no.
like, I don't know, 90-ish% of the first two books. I think where they both fudged it up for me was in the end. Like, the ending was too rushed. This one, I didn't like Amalfi, and the whole thing was from Amalfi's perspective, so just didn't work for me. Like I found, I thought I did, but I literally wrote down something in like angry caps at some point, like, why
yeah,
won't you communicate? But there was but yeah, I think just for the ideas, there were still, I was talking about I was considering doing the thing that you said, Jared, which was to stop book 3 and go to book 4 before I maybe try and come back. But then at the point I was in book 3, I had some interesting ideas occasionally that like there was sorry, what what I'm trying to say is that like I became interested again. So it was like a graph each time, like, oh, that's a cool idea, and then like fail in the execution. Oh, that's a cool idea. Like, okay, I'm angry about these things that you did instead. But yeah, if you're the kind of reader who has patience for that sort of thing, then I think yeah, I, because we had a deadline, I didn't finish this, but I don't intend to DNF it. I will finish it, and I'm sure I'll take away things that I like from it. So yeah. I did have one question about there was one reason that made me think this wasn't a well written book, but I want second and third opinions on that. Is I didn't get a sense of the amount of time that passed very well. It felt like I was constantly jarred by what they said happened in the time that they were in. It felt like just a few days passed each time, when in fact, really what happened in between was several decades. And did you feel like you got a better sense of that than I did, or what was it just how it was written?
I went looking at reviews of this afterwards. That is a very common criticism of this book. In
Okay.
fact, a lot of people have pointed out that it actually is inconsistent. What
Mm.
some of the events that happen actually don't make numerical sense. They're out of order, etc. So the proofreading of the book maybe is not, and probably because it was serialized in the way that it was, is not consistent. That seems to be a common thread of it. There, like for a thing that happens over millennia, you do not get the sequence of time kind of in the way that you would like in a narrative sense. I'm sure if you pull it apart, and it is put there in a couple of places of this happened at that day, kind of thing, then it might help, because like Amalfi does live a millennia, but we don't actually get the sense that he has lived a millennia, if you know what I mean. He is the same character in book 2 as he is in book 4 in a lot of stages. There's no growth there.
Yeah. I think in my review I called it a chaotic mess. And, you're right. The inconsistency is there. It's you don't get a good sense of how much time is passing in between each episode. And I think by the end of book 4, he's 2,000 years old, possibly.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, that's
the end
it.
of the universe happened 1,000 years from.
That's all we got left, Vasha.
Luckily for you, you're not going to make it. Marcia, I hate to break it to you.
Unless you make one of those drugs to keep you creative.
You look like you're like your business pointed, but like you're not mad.
No, I'm disappointed because that feels silly. Like, at what point did we start estimating the age of the universe to be several billion years?
Yeah,
and like we just like, was it not in the 50s? Did it happen after that? Like how like it seems silly to say it's going to end in 1,000 years from now, and the time scale that we always talk about is millions or billions of years.
Yeah, I think it was closer to because Amalfi was over 2,000 years old, but I think it's almost 4,000 years since the beginning of the bridge or whatever they
right.
1960
Oh yes, of
or
course.
whatever.
Yeah.
But even so, it's still a ridiculously short amount of time.
But it also because of what we know about the universe, it doesn't make sense either. Do you know what I mean? How they explain the end of the world and the end of time, etc. In time scales, we think the universe is probably, the theory that the book works off is it's very solid and present theory insofar as the Big Bang expands and it starts to contract. But if anything, we're just past the midpoint of where we are in time. But this is modern science and what we kind of suspect and know at this time. So can't blame Blish for that. Maybe.
Yeah. So that was the other reason why I was excited for Triumph of Time, because I thought we're looking at the city being alive for millions or billions of years, and I was like, Amalfi's mayor for all that time. No, thank you. But 1,000 more years I can handle. Yeah, I gotta go read that book. I will finish it, Chris, and I will send you a note when I do.
You do. I don't doubt you for a second, Varsha, but I just feel if you listen to your heart, the only reason that you will be finishing it is to send me the picture.
It's just, yeah, I told you so.
And if that's the reason you're going to put yourself through it, then so be it. But I'm just giving you permission already to say, look, don't do it to yourself.
Don't
Do your reread of Malazan instead.
Fair. Very fair. Yeah. I'm trying to think. Was there anything else to discuss? You said you had a lot to say about the final chapter, Jared. I know we talked about it in bits and pieces, but was there anything we missed?
No, I think we went over it pretty. I mean, the final chapter is only 6 pages, and Chris brought it up the final 2 paragraphs there or whatever, and that was part of it, and also I just thought and them arguing about the universe, who was going to create which universe or whatever, but and a very nice poetic finish, I thought, that kind of made the book a little better than what it was, at least.
Yeah.
But that was it. Yeah.
The only other thing I'm sad about is that none of us, there wasn't even one of us that kind of really enjoyed it. Do you know what I mean? That would have been nice, because I would like to actually hear from somebody who really did enjoy the book, exactly what it was about the book that they really grappled onto. I suspect I know, but it would be nice to hear somebody explain that.
The first book until the last chapter, I'm probably there.
Yeah.
But
I enjoyed the first book up
So did I.
until it had minor problems, but it wasn't. It wasn't like the third one. The third one, it's just.
I suppose that also shows the evolution of Blish as a writer. I suppose I guess it's a factor of both the fact that this was serialized and the novels were not, and also maybe he improved as a writer. That I think the first book was third in publication order, if I remember correctly. So
3142, I believe it goes.
3142.
I believe.
Okay.
Which is your pie order, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The 3142 it was, yeah. 3142.
Yeah. So I did like the first one a lot, and I haven't read the fourth book yet, but I feel like there's scope to like it if it wasn't more Amalfi. But I'm gonna reserve judgment on that until I actually finish it.
I believe Case of Conscience is also in the SF Masterworks. I do have it. It's a much shorter book. I'm actually quite interested to read it.
Yeah.
Given that I'd like to read a shorter Blish book, self-contained, because like you, Jared, I think the man can write. I think some of his prose in some places is actually excellent. So I think in a shorter form, in a self-contained novel that he's went ahead and written, I'm quite interested in that idea.
I am also eager for that book because I think it addresses questions of religion and some philosophy there, which I thought he did a good job with in the first book. So yeah,
for sure.
Cool. How far down the line is that one?
I think a few years.
Okay.
2037.
I had to get my anti-aging drug.
That's what I said. Maybe we all make it.
It's the good news is it's just an antibiotic.
Right.
Oh man. I think the next one is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, right?
Yes, it is.
Cool.
Okay. I've read that one. I liked it, and there's a lot to talk
I have
about.
read that one too.
Cool. Have you read it, Jared?
I have read the comic book form.
Oh, interesting.
Which was painted, and it was in large format, and it basically just took the text right off the book and put it on the page and put it with a picture.
Oh, okay.
I pretty much read the book.
That will be interesting to hear, actually, Jared, because I think this is I think The Android's Dream of Electric Sheep is an extremely, extremely literary book. I think Dick is an extremely literary writer.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
actually, an awful lot of the ideas are very much in the words that he uses and describes. So actually, seeing whether that translates and you get something new out of it would be one of the things I'd be
Yeah.
most interested to hear.
That's a
Yeah.
long time ago, so I'll try my best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Book 30, by the way, is Kiss of Conscience, so we're not actually too far down the line.
Okay.
Oh,
Just a couple of years. Just a
That's
couple of years.
Ah.
um, what was I
Two
saying?
heart
Yeah.
attacks and 3 marriages later. There we go.
Yeah, I think Philip K. Dick is one of those writers who explores like the whole sphere of the idea, like all the consequences of what he says. I'm really looking forward to when we talk about Ubik. I think that one's also not far off. So yeah, cool. All right, for anybody who's still with us, we are going to read Two Androids, Dream of Electric Sheep next month. We don't have the dates yet, but it'll be probably late November-ish that we discuss the book. We'll see everyone then. If you're joining us, if you'd like to join us on these discussions or just on the forum, chat with us about these books or any others, consider joining the Page Chewing Forum. I'll have Jared and Chris do outros. Chris, do you want to start us off this time?
My name is Chris Mohan, sometimes YouTuber, sometimes appear on other people's channels talking about cool stuff like this, or on the Page Chewing forums with yourself and Jared. Jared, you're up.
I'm Jared. I am on the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel, and I'm on the Page Chewing forums as well. And you can catch my mostly weekly blog, Creative Crossroads, on pagechewing.com.
Nice. Yeah, those are a lot of fun to read. All right, we'll see everyone a month from now. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.